to Farsighted. I'm your host, Eric Mack, and it is the waning days of November. There's just 1 month left in 2016, and so far it's been a year dominated by some pretty wild politics. But if you can get past all those headlines, it was actually a really big year for the kind of technology that we like to watch here at Farsighted. Now, I know the events of 2016 have changed the vision many people had in their heads of what the next 5 to 10 years might look like in the future. But no matter where your head is at right now, one thing 2016 has shown us is that life in, say, 2026 is a lot more likely to involve self-driving cars and other connected technology that will move us and our stuff around. So this seemed to be the year that this technology went from being mostly hyped to, dare I say, mostly inevitable. We've got self-driving Ubers, we've got self-driving big rigs, we've got autonomous Teslas, and that's really just to name a few. An even bigger signal that this stuff is the real deal comes in the fact that there is an emerging ecosystem around this technology, and companies trying to figure out how we'll weave it into daily life in the future in a way that makes sense and is safe. And so for today, we've actually pulled in one of the folks who is doing that work that you'll probably appreciate in the not quite too distant future. So please, let's welcome our guest there in studio in San Francisco, Paul Sakamoto, the COO of Savari.
Hey, thank you, Eric.
How are you doing, Paul?
Great.
So this is a company that's working on all the other stuff that we need to connect not just to our cars, but also to our cities and to their environment, so that it all kind of works together and works safely. Is that a fair description? What would you say is your mission over this longer time scale?
Autonomous vehicles are great. The whole idea of having a bunch of essentially robot cars, but they don't really become truly fully effective until they're all connected. If you kind of think of the real promise of having autonomous vehicles, it'd be not having them be little islands of self-driving self-awareness, but actually to be coordinated in their driving so that they are actually much greater than a human driver could ever be. Because one quick example, they come to a stoplight, a bunch of cars are stopped, and if you want them to all get going today, even if you have an autonomous vehicle, it's going to wait for the car in front of it to move before it moves. If they're all connected, they can all just take off at the same time, and it seems like a small thing, but if you think about the amount of efficiency that you gain in both throughput and safety, and especially energy conservation, it's tremendous. It's one small example.
Gotcha. So, I mean, what do you envision all this technology is going to mean for us? About 10 years down the road, are you of the mind that we're going to do away with human-driven cars eventually? How long are we looking at that transition, or is this more, just going to be kind of a technology that doesn't go mainstream quite as soon?
Well, not only is the market evolving a lot, Eric, but also the way that we're even thinking about the market evolves as time goes by. And it's very geocentric. For instance, in the United States, that's going to evolve a lot differently than it does in, say, Malaysia or Japan or some other area. I think you can look at the different regions of the world and you can think of some places are already very, very comfortable with much more of a public transportation or mass transportation kind of mentality. And ownership of a private vehicle is actually something that is uncommon, right? And so in those areas, we think autonomous technology will just immediately take off and be of great benefit and rapid market turnover. In areas like the United States, there's going to be both regional and market differences, across the nation. If you can imagine, once again, a New York City, much more likely to be a rapid takeoff. San Francisco, same thing. Out in the middle of the United States, maybe not so much because their needs are a little different and the the market mentality is a lot different in each of those areas. And maybe actually their real need to have independent transportation might be a lot different out there in the middle of the heartland than it is in a dense populated area.
And so your company, Savari, actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but you signed some sort of a deal in China, right? What are you doing over there, and how is it different there?
Well, we've engaged the largest car manufacturer in China, which is Shanghai Automotive Industrial Corp, or as they call themselves, SAIC. So SAIC is a joint venture with some of the major OEM car makers like General Motors and others to manufacture those types of vehicles in China, both the brands that I mentioned and their own SAIC brand. We're using them as our distributor in China and also as our partner to help penetrate the Chinese market, which is great because in China, for instance, as an example of a different market, you do have to have some amount of government cooperation in order to have anything like this be successful. And SAIC is a private-public cooperative company, sort of a joint venture company between government and private sectors.
Okay, so lay it out for me. What this is going to look like. For example, you and I had a conversation about an hour ago as you were on your way to the CNET studio there in San Francisco. You were stuck in traffic, and we were talking about the accident that was in front of you, and you could see where everyone else was. How is that journey different in the future if everything that you guys are working on comes to fruition?
Well, in that future, let's say it is the 2026 vision you were talking about. Instead of having a sort of an estimate of time that ends up being off by a factor of 2 to come to San Francisco to make that journey from Silicon Valley up here, the estimate wouldn't be an estimate. It would be a direct forecast and it'd be accurate to the minute. There absolutely would. It'd be like a train in Europe or something. It wouldn't be like getting in a car today and taking a journey. I think at a very high level, the predictability of transportation, the safety of it would completely change. As well as the productivity, because I wouldn't have to sit there looking at the license plate in front of me as I'm traveling along. I could be, doing some actual, work.
And you'd probably have cars that are a lot better at doing their job than I am, since I forgot to introduce everyone else who's sitting around the table. So let's throw it to questions from you guys. I've got to introduce you guys, but of course, CNET's Kelsey Adams. Stephen Beach behind the controls, Jeff Sparkman, and also joining us from Sydney, Australia, over the Google Hangout is Luke Lancaster. Hi guys, sorry I forgot to introduce you. Go ahead and jump in.
I was wondering, we usually talk about smart cars in the context of sort of smart cities. At least when I think about smart cars, it's usually in a large group, as you were saying, maybe approaching lights or as part of an integrated network. And there have been contests to try and design smart cities and so on. So I'm really interested in this question of how you would take this technology to rural areas here or in China. Could you say more about that?
Sure. The technology actually applies across all of these different situations. I think the way that you'd want to coordinate traffic and use energy more efficiently, or even clear the path for emergency service vehicles in a city, is fairly straightforward. You'd have control or priority established between the car communication and communicating with the stoplights, et cetera, and also through the traffic management centers, which look like a big war room, like in the movies. These things really exist. But I think out in the country, it's a little less obvious sometimes, but the way that it plays out is, you can use this same technology to locally broadcast road conditions. For instance, we could actually transmit a condition of ice or slick road or something that's hidden from a viewer. Like if you're traveling through a canyon road and it's out there in the middle of nowhere, if a proper transponder was located at that blind corner where there might be ice and you wouldn't see it, instead of hitting an ice patch at 60 miles an hour, you would understand you need to slow down to a near crawl and therefore avoid a potentially very bad accident. One example, there's actually active programs that are going on now out in some rural areas to actually have programs where in the middle of the United States, they end up with a lot of accidents, which are, believe it or not, crosswinds blowing semi-trucks off the road.
Wow.
And so having a sensor that could actually say, okay, we've got a 60-mile-an-hour crosswind coming when you come down out of the pass, slow it down to about 20 miles an hour and crawl, or else you're going over, buddy, is a message that could be broadcast back up the traffic chain with enough warning so that the trucker could avoid that accident. By the time they can sense that on their own, they're already down. So
Yeah.
it's an issue. The number of trucks blown over in Wyoming is tens of incidents per year. I was stunned.
Yeah, I actually saw a video the other day. I was just watching stuff, and it was just somebody's dash cam video of a semi in front of them, and just you can just see it starting, and then just straight over.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a problem we could fix already before self-driving cars, right? We just need sensors and communication.
Well, the particular sensor technology that we use today, where we envision a roadmap of different radio technologies, but the actual algorithms and the idea of putting the little black box in every car, actually our box is silver. But anyway, you get the idea. The little black box in every car, and then they don't run into each other, or they can be messaged as far as issues go, is something that we could technically do today. Most of the hurdles have to do with economics and regulation and the usual friction to life that I think we encounter.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the devices that pick up signals from the traffic lights? So basically, all the cars are just kind of telling each other where they are, right? And then so that they avoid each other,
Right.
and then they also can. That helps to find. It helps to tell a driver where there might be traffic and stuff up ahead or something.
Well, the number one mission of the vehicle-to-vehicle communication, or V2V as we call it, is to give each car, whether it's being driven by a robot driver or if it's being driven by a human driver, about a 3-second warning that another vehicle path is about to intersect it. Now, you'd think, well, a lot of those things you can already see. You can use radar, you can use LiDAR, but specifically because this technology can cover a 360-degree field around the car, means that when you're pulling out from, say, a blind corner, like from behind a van parked in front of your driveway or near your driveway, or some other tight circumstance, it can see around that corner. So that's the main advantage of this, is being able to see around blind corners for safety. Now, for the infrastructure piece, communicating to the roadside unit, that's got a safety piece, which has to do with communicating conditions, as I said, but also on a more common basis. Inside a city, like in the smart city application we're talking about, it doesn't matter if you have an autonomous vehicle or a human-driven vehicle. You can get information to the driver of the car, once again, robotic or human, that tells it, okay, the stoplight is at this particular phase and it's got so many seconds to go to either turn red, green, amber, whatever. We can also do the emergency service vehicle preemption, where the ambulance is coming through, shut down traffic on all the cross streets, which is a function that, once again, they have a rudimentary version today, but it's what we call line of sight, right? There's a beacon that goes out, triggers the next stoplight, but it doesn't clear the whole road. So as a result, it doesn't fix the problem for the whole route to the hospital, the fire, or whatever. It's a much different, kind of last generation sort of technology. So those are just a couple examples, and then there's lots of others. One thing that people probably don't know about is we've already prototyped and demonstrated with the U.S. Department of Transportation a cell phone based tech. So you would have, like, a pedestrian would have a cell phone. So here's a quick pitch for why cell phones are a great sensor. Today, most of you CNET watchers, listeners, if you were to leave your wallet at home, you might not go back for it. If you were to leave your phone at home, you probably would go back for it because you're in a horrible state if you don't have your phone. So what we've already done is shown that we can actually use a phone as a sensor for a pedestrian, keeping in mind thousands of pedestrians are run over each year, and actually use that to communicate with the infrastructure and say, you're about to step into a busy street, don't do that. And I think we read in the paper, maybe once a month or so, someone does that. Also, we could signal a vehicle that's approaching that they're about to run over maybe a preoccupied pedestrian. I'm going to be generous.
That's very cool.
So I wonder if there's, when you're kind of building your environment and your network of sensors so that, these vehicles are always aware of this environment, I mean, how do you kind of build in some of the, more unpredictable factors? I'm thinking like wildlife, or, we also recently published a piece here on CNET about how a lot of drivers are excited for self-driving cars because they want to mess with them, like screw with them, like cut them off on purpose and stuff. How do you prepare for those kind of factors?
Well, my general statement is never let the great be the enemy of the good, right? I think the U.S. DOT is estimating they can cut down traffic deaths by about 80% by complete installation of this technology. We're killing about 35,000 people a year, so I think the 20 some odd thousand people that are saved, that's worth saving, not to mention the million injuries. But to back up to those other things, this is not a replacement technology for every other sensor that can go into a car. It's one of a number of sensor technologies. So if you can imagine the car of the future, the 2026 car that we're talking about would have radar, it would have LiDAR, which is the laser version of radar, and it would have also echolocation. It would have cameras, of course, cameras everywhere, probably 360 degrees around the car of cameras, and any other sensor that we can come up with, including this one, so that we can actually have beyond human sense for the car. And I think that's That's the car of the future. So we're absolutely looking at things like the deer. Okay, the deer would be pegged not by the radio technology, but it would actually be found by the lidar, the the lidar and the radar and the camera. And those three would take a look at it. There'd be what's called a fusion sensor, sensor fusion computing program located in the car, and it would make a decision about whether that was a real image or not, what the urgency is, and a bunch of other factors, and take appropriate action or recommend appropriate action if a human's still driving the car. So that's the net of it. And then this communication technology could be used to send that information back to the car behind you, which would be perhaps key information depending on how tightly the traffic's packed. So it's it's going to be amazing.
I'm curious what this sounds like to Luke. I don't know, Luke, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I was told when I was in Australia that they have a much stronger car culture there than we do here. And here we have sort of a tradition of driving as a sign of independence, right? And adulthood and so forth. So I'm just wondering what this sounds like to you, Luke.
We definitely do have a car culture, but that's because I guess we've got the space for driving. In a city, I could definitely see something like this, especially because we have a very strong public transport culture as well. Like buses and trains. I guess that would be my question about this. Like in terms of shaping public attitude, is it an easier sell to your average driver to do this as something that's based around public transport first?
Actually, that is something that's happening now. A lot of the early projects for autonomous driving that include connected cars, connected vehicles rather, are taking places with like some of the Uber pilots and other things where they're looking at different ways to connect the cars. They're looking at a bunch of varieties of technology. They're using autonomous vehicle technologies primarily to supplant their drivers, which are their cost center. And I think the best thing about the public transportation is, unlike private ownership, you can very, very tightly scope the mission of the vehicle. And that's actually important for success. If you think about it, cutting down the checklist of things you have to do with an autonomous vehicle tremendously increases your chances of success with it. And so, if you can imagine, I'm only going to do these 10 blocks of downtown San Francisco during these hours of daylight, and if it rains, forget it. It makes it a much easier task to do than if you're saying, I'm going to let any Tom, Dick, or Harry have their autonomous vehicle and try to break it, which is, I think you mentioned earlier, is that something that people will try to do? Well, I think everyone talks about that guy who managed to Darwinize himself with the Tesla car, and that's going to happen. That's going to be I think there'll be always someone who is somehow going to overcome the few thousand PhD man years of work that go into the safety systems, and then we'll pack another few years of energy into it.
I mean, people have been doing that with like regular cars for years, like Dukes of Hazzard. I mean, they're flipping cars over jumps and stuff. So people are going to do that stuff no matter what.
Skateboards, jetpacks.
Yeah. People like to be daredevils. So.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is I think it'd be a little ambitious or arrogant to even say we're going to eliminate traffic death, but we're going to manage them down a lot.
That's what some of the major car manufacturers have been saying, though. They want to eliminate traffic deaths completely by 2020, I think was the year. Do you think that's a realistic number or a realistic year?
I think I would say that there's like what someone says like that, I think is a goal, right? If you, let me jump sideways, clean out of tech and go to management theory, right? You have to have a BHAG, right? A big, hairy, audacious goal. I think that's theirs. And I wish I'm not going to bet against them. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, people are safer driving than flying, but are usually more afraid of flying because we don't like to feel out of control, right? We don't like to feel helpless.
I think there's a lot of people that way, but I think it's changing. If you look at the dynamic from, say, 40 years ago even versus today, I think it's shifted quite a bit. I think when we look at the dynamic of the desire of the car culture, people wanting to have their own independence and have their own car and drive it whatever way they please, kind of being scofflaws and saying, the traffic, speed limit is a serving suggestion. That's when I was a kid. And now today, I have to say, millennials like my children are, they kind of like driving is kind of optional. It'd be nice if I had a nicer car, but frankly, I just need to get from here to there. And I think it's a generation that's much more prone to start that trend to say, I didn't really want a car, I wanted transport, right? And I think that's a key market change, and it's not going to happen everywhere at the same time. It'll be uneven.
I gotta say, I drove home from Tahoe this weekend, and I wanted an autonomous car badly. So
Yeah,
I was tired. I was like telling my wife, I'm like, if my car can drive me, like I wouldn't have to worry about, I'm staring off into the woods, and like the robot wouldn't do that, or the autonomous car wouldn't do that. It would be paying attention the whole time.
Yeah.
I hope
So,
your wife
yeah,
took the wheel at this point.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can't wait. I can't wait.
So we do
Yeah.
have somebody in the chat room asking, why do we need self-driving cars in the first place? And saying that tech has replaced a lot of middle-class jobs, and is this a threat? Would anybody like to just take on that basic question? Why do we need these?
Well, I mean, I've talked a lot, but I continue talking.
Yeah,
if you like.
please.
Yeah, so this is something that you look at in the U.S. Maybe there's 3.5 million jobs that are directly dependent on driving, and would those jobs be affected? Eventually, initially, there's probably actually more drivers, and the reason is because you look at every autonomous pilot that's come out so far, and what do they have? They have another driver actually sitting there in the driver's position, ready to take over if the autonomous system fails. So temporarily, I don't think that there's an issue probably for years and years. Now, eventually, there's going to be certain classes. When you break through in certain areas and certain market segments are going to be affected more than others. Maybe certain aspects of long-haul trucking might get affected. But I think to say that we're going to push back on autonomous vehicles as something that's going to reduce a certain number of jobs in the trucking industry, for instance, is to say, well, why didn't they push back on triple hookups for trailers, right? Because they were running 1/3 less trucks all of a sudden. No one, you didn't hear trucker strikes over driving that. I think there's all sorts of issues, and I think that it won't be an overnight thing where all of a sudden 3.5 million people are out of a job, right? I think that this is going to be a very gradual transition into each of these segments, and you're going to find that, for instance, probably short-haul truckers don't get taken over for years and years. And so I think unlike some other things, it's not like a factory closing,
Yeah.
right? It's not like saying we're going to move 20,000 jobs out of Detroit and into Mexico. It's a lot different. I think it's over time it changes, which probably doesn't completely fix it for everybody, but I think I would put it in the natural evolutionary kind of notion of job changes and job market changes versus overnight someone made a decision and killed 3 million jobs.
Yeah, it's a gradual
Very
thing.
well. Yeah. So, any final thoughts, Paul, in terms of not just where you think we're going with this kind of technology in our cars, but also in our cities? Anything you want to add?
Sure. I think that by the time that this actually happens, like a lot of things that we've experienced, whether it's consumer items like HDTV and things, we were able to do it a long time before we had it. And I think that that's the case here. We're actually able to do all of this stuff. The tech already exists. It's already had millions of miles of road test, particularly the connected vehicle tech. I think, let me pull up a couple things. We already have, 1,000 of these things installed in test beds across the United States and in other places in China and other locations. And this is the thing that communicates with the car and the traffic signal or back to the traffic management center, whatever you're doing, and can relay messages around to the other vehicles in the traffic stream as to road conditions, et cetera. It's called a roadside unit. And these were available for the, like 1,000-ish a piece kind of level, and the price is going to go down. It's definitely one of those things that the price goes in half every couple of years. And so it'll be essentially something that's easily made ubiquitous. When we look at this box here, this is actually not even our latest one. This is the little box that goes in every car. The eventual price of this is going to be a few tens of dollars that goes in every car. So if you think about the impact to this, a social priority, et cetera, I'm frankly a little conservative on that. So normally I wouldn't say it this way, but actually it's one of the few places where government could come in, do a mandate now, save thousands of lives within the next 5 years, and they're going to have a tough time doing it, right? So the vehicle-to-vehicle communication or the vehicle-to-everything communication is something that for a few $billion and some effort, we could probably save thousands of lives. And if you think about other ways that we spend money that don't do that, I think it's a shame, and hopefully everyone will kind of start asking the questions about why we don't. And that plus autonomous vehicles, let's think about 80% times the 35,000 people in the United States per year. Let's think about 80% times I think it's actually closer to a couple million people who are killed or seriously injured in the world in traffic accidents, and taking that number down by even a more modest amount, it's actually I think it's an imperative that we all get behind this and back autonomous and connected driving.
And the devices that you're showing us, those are going to be standard in cars pretty soon, right?
The function will be standard in cars. The fact is that most of the power of this is located in right now, say a dozen ICs, and it gets shrunk into a couple ICs. There's some ambitious projects that have reduced it already. I think very much that the physical content's going to be subsumed into the overall vehicle computing and communication architecture, and that the remaining thing, and one of the things that we specialize in, is actually all of the artificial intelligence and the algorithms that determine the hard part, which is, are you going to run into that car or not? Think about being in the traffic jam I was just in. We have to filter thousands of messages per second and determine which 3 are the ones coming from cars that are going to potentially harm you, and that's the thing that will continue to evolve also.
Cool.
Well, hey, I'm really glad that you're working on this, and I think we're all really excited to see where it goes. And it's great to meet the person who's got our safety definitely at heart, or one of them at least. And I wish you success, and I'm excited to see where this goes. We'll be watching. I think we're going to take a quick break and then come back and maybe talk about Westworld. I don't know if you're a Westworld fan, Paul, but you're welcome to stick around and join the conversation, or if you need to get on down the road, please feel free.
Well, thanks for asking, and thanks for having me here.
You got it.
Yeah, we'll take a little break and be right back, guys.
Welcome back to Farsighted. I'm Eric Mack here in New Mexico. We still got Kelsey Adams, Jeff Sparkman, and Stephen Beecham there in the studio in San Francisco, and Luke Lancaster joining us from CNET Australia in Sydney. And so, we started off our show with a few technical glitches, but if there's one place where you really don't want to run into technical glitches, it is the world of Westworld, HBO's latest hit sci-fi series. And if you don't know, really quick synopsis, the basic idea is an amusement park, maybe in the near future, that is populated by incredibly lifelike robots that you can do all kinds of things to. But in theory, you're relatively safe from them as long as the code remains stable. And does it? Well, you got to watch to find out. The season finale is coming up on Sunday, and I think everyone here but Stephen has seen something. So this is really just a seminar to bring Stephen up to speed.
Yes, thanks.
No, I haven't seen it either.
and interestingly, it's based off a film from the 1970s. And tell me what you guys think. So, in the 1970s, not actually a very good film, by the way. It's basically more what you would imagine robots to be in the 1970s. Just kind of these metal tin cans with really well done layer of skin over them, I guess. And now the more modern version is, flesh and blood robots that are basically 3D printed, we think. But I always found it interesting that the show, whereas I think if this show were based on something more contemporary, it seems like it would just take place in virtual reality. Am I the only person that thought that?
You think it's a virtual reality? Like a dream? The whole show's a dream?
No, the show takes place in a physical amusement park, like in the West. But I think it takes place that way because it's based off a 1970s movie when they didn't even have virtual reality back then. But it seems like this concept lends itself so much more to virtual reality. I love the way I've derailed this conversation already.
Well, but if half the point of going to this place is to have sex, doesn't it make more sense to have solid objects?
Oh, sure, if you're into solid objects.
Yeah, but just, does it? Or just like a really good, bodysuit?
Like a Red Dwarf, anybody? Okay.
It's all about the nerves. Anyway, let's just talk about the show. What do you guys think? What are you guys' takes on the first season so far? I'll shut up.
Well, I'm only caught up through episode 4.
I just want to go back to that, like the whole virtual reality thing. And I guess this is kind of what I think about the show as well. There's a whole sort of creating life element to the people who build the park, and like there's a physicality to that, you know, and like they're making people essentially. So I don't know if the whole virtual reality thing plays into that.
No, I think that's fair. I think when I just watch it, seems like logistically this would be so much easier if it were literally.
Oh,
just
absolutely,
code,
yeah.
But,
And like much easier to turn off when if things go poorly.
right.
To spoil anything.
Luke says it like he's never seen a holodeck episode.
Those things never break.
But yeah, I'm super into the show. I'm in deep. We've got like our water cooler catch-ups, which we haven't had in the office for ages.
So Luke, can I ask
Right,
you?
it's like Game of Thrones level.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And it's kind of the quick whip around. Who's up to date? So you don't spoil anything.
So can I ask you what makes it
Go ahead, Kelsey.
what makes it special? Because I'm hearing a lot about this show. People
Sorry.
keep telling me I need to watch it. It's so good. But I don't want to sound horribly jaded here, but I feel like anybody who's been reading science fiction, watching science fiction their whole lives has seen all the basic plots and questions before. Like, what's really a person? What's really free will? Can you really love? Is it dehumanizing to hurt a robot? And I mean, it just seems like I'm just wondering what makes this one particularly great, or different, or something.
I don't know if anything particularly does. Like I'm a pretty big sci-fi nerd myself, and they're not new issues, but they're done in a really entertaining way, I guess. Like it's quite well made. Like it's a very well made show, and it's HBO, so the production values are through the roof, and it does a really good job of hitting that in the serialized TV HBO format, which I think has sucked a lot of people in. And it's kind of like the Game of Thrones thing. That doesn't do anything new in terms of fantasy, but people have jumped on it because for a mass audience, they might not be huge fantasy fans,
This is what comes from seeking answers.
And there's kind of a cool aspect of it, a meta aspect of it, which is not completely unique, but the fact that the characters are, in a fantasy world within the fantasy world that you're watching. I kind of find that appealing, and it's a lot of what's popular in kind of prestige TV right now in terms of there's constant twists and turns and uncertainties and surprises, but like Luke said, they're just done particularly well.
Do you guys have favorite
Yeah, I
characters?
think you saw like the first. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't realize you were still talking. The sound is a little bit odd. I was just wondering if you guys have favorite characters. Like, are you sucked in on a personal level, or is it more about the ride, the experience?
I think it's more kind of the narrative for me rather than any specific characters. Like, it hasn't been revealed yet, but I'm pretty sure there are several different timelines happening, and it's kind of piecing that together as the show unfolds that's really interesting for me.
Yeah, that's something that I just kind of came to realize over the last couple of weeks, and people had to point it out because I'm kind of dense when it comes to this. But yeah, I think time is like an added dimension to the whole thing. Really obvious, and that they're going out of their way to not make obvious. We think. We're not quite sure. But I've also noticed in terms of characters, and Luke and Jeff, you can tell me what you think, but it's another one similar to Game of Thrones where you're not really sure who's good or really if there are any good guys, good gals involved. And so far, the ones that do seem to be potentially the protagonists are worth rooting for also seem maybe to make just terrible decisions and not be super bright.
Yeah.
It's hard to root for many of them.
Absolutely. Like, poor James Marsden every episode, he just gets put through the ringer.
It's true. So Jeff, I think you if I understand right, you watched maybe the first two. What are your impressions?
I like it a lot. I went and watched another 2 episodes last night instead of sleeping, and it's interesting just to watch all of this kind of like unfold and like unravel, but then also kind of like twist around, and I tend to have kind of a short attention span these days, so the fact that I was able to keep paying attention seems like a good thing. it occurred to me that like I feel like Michael Crichton must have really just hated the hell out of Disneyland because well, I mean, yeah, because I was just trying to describe this and I'm like, well, it's sort of like Jurassic Park but with cowboy robots, and then I'm like, well, it kind of is. Not the series, but the basic premise of the original movie. And then I'm like, well, why does Michael Crichton have all these like theme parks that just go horribly awry? It's like he just had a really crappy time waiting at the Matterhorn or something.
Yeah, his childhood must have been pretty interesting. So RG makes a good point in the chat room, and I wonder if this is kind of why it's hard to find many characters to root for in that show, because our proxies in the show are the people that are going to this amusement park, and they're kind of by definition all self-absorbed rich people. So that makes it difficult to find somebody to relate to in the show for a lot of people. But I agree with Luke. So, the production values and the storytelling still make it worthwhile, even though it's been kind of hard to get invested in any of the characters. But that's kind of similar to Game of Thrones as well, right?
I still haven't watched it yet.
You haven't watched Game of Thrones?
Did you watch Game of Thrones, Luke?
I'm that guy.
Yes, yep. Sorry, you were saying, Jeff?
Oh, I was just saying I'm like the one guy who still hasn't watched it yet.
But you can certainly
That's
make a
fine.
great show about terrible people. That's no question about that.
Yeah. Didn't Quentin
absolutely.
Tarantino just had a movie about terrible people all in one room? I forget what it was called.
Quentin Tarantino had a
Hateful Eight.
movie, you're saying.
What was it called,
Yeah.
Luke? I don't know.
Hateful
Yeah, like
Eight.
it's very much an along for the ride show for me, rather than picking individual characters to root for. And I think that's okay, because it's not getting bogged down in a lot of those character focused moments. Like, it is keeping the narrative moving, even if it is teasing it out really painfully slowly,
Right, I agree. Well, it's Westworld, and if you haven't checked it out, I definitely recommend it. First season wraps up on Sunday on HBO. We're about out of time, but before we go, I'm wondering if any of you guys had any kind of pop culture things that you're into right now, or that you're looking forward. Recommendation, if you want to go around the table. Anybody got anything?
Just on the weird Western note, reading East of West, the comic. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic thing about the Four Horsemen and the end of the world set in the future. It's really weird, but if you're into Westworld, I'd also say check out East of West.
Awesome. Where do you find that?
Comic shops everywhere.
Oh, it's a comic book. Oh,
Hey, you know what else
gotcha.
you can find? It's a comic book. Luke's got one. It's called Bad Guys.
I do write a comic called The Bad Guys. You should check that out as well, just to shamelessly plug.
Cool.
Sweet. All right. Anyone else? Final thoughts, final recommendations?
Oh, well, there's a big crossover
One,
thing going on this
no.
week with Arrow, Supergirl, The Flash,
Flash.
and DC Legends. So that's happening. And I'm really busy being terrible at Overwatch, personally. What about you, Jeff?
I've been doing a whole bunch of nothing lately. That's my new hobby.
Fun.
Beach him.
I have two kids. I don't really have time to
Yeah.
do anything except sleep. So that's about it. I don't watch TV really, except for Raiders. Go Raiders.
Oh, that was the wrong thing to say.
In
So,
2026,
I,
people will still be fighting over sports.
I'll give a nod to Arrival, although I would have liked to have seen it shortened by about 20 minutes. But I think a lot of people that are into the same sort of thing we're into would enjoy it. So check that out. And as we go out the door, I'll also give a shameless plug to a feature I'm working on for CNET. I spoke to former Apple CEO John Scully, and for one, he's the guy in between Steve Jobs, the two times. And for once, didn't actually talk about Apple a whole lot. He's working on some really interesting projects that also deal with future technologies. And so that'll be coming up on CNET in the next week or so. And you'll want to check it out if for no reason other than to hear his prediction of how old Stephen's children will live to be. And I think you'll find it surprising, and that entire generation, not just Steven's children. He doesn't know Steven's children personally, but so check that out. And I think that's our show for today. It's top of the hour. It's probably almost time for lunch in Australia. So I want to say thank you to Luke Lancaster in Australia, and also to our guest Paul Sakamoto from Safari. Thank you so much for stopping by, and also for Kelsey Adams and Jeff Sparkman there in the studio, and Stephen Beecham behind the controls. Bonnie Burton, feel better. We'll see you next time. This is Farsighted. Thanks for watching.